Welcome to Ivory Secrets. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. We tell the kinds of stories that stay with you long after the last word. And before we begin, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. We love knowing where our listeners are now. Let's get into it. He noticed the twins first. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward, in the elevator, going up to his room, staring at the ceiling of the hotel at 2 a.m. while the city hummed outside. He had not noticed Vivienne first. He had noticed 2 small red-haired girls sitting on their knees in a restaurant booth, both of them leaning over a children's menu with the focused intensity of people negotiating a contract. And he had thought absently that they looked exactly like the photograph his mother kept on her mantle of him at that age. And then he had looked up, and there was Vivienne. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. Though Callum Reeves had stopped counting at the 14-month mark, or so he told himself. She was sitting across from the girls, one elbow on the table, her chin resting in her palm, reading something on her phone, with the ease of a woman who had nothing to prove to anyone. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a dark green coat he didn't recognize. She looked, and this was the part that did something strange to his chest, she looked completely fine. Callum stood in the entrance of the restaurant for what was probably 4 seconds, and felt like 40 years. The maitre said something to him. He answered. He didn't know what he said. He was seated on the other side of the room, and he picked up a menu, and he did not read a single word on it. The girls had ordered. He could tell because one of them was now spinning a sugar packet on the table while the other one appeared to be lecturing her mother about something. One small finger pointed upward in the universal gesture of a person who is making an important point. Vivienne was nodding with the patience of someone who had heard this particular argument before and had made her peace with it. The girls had red hair. Callum's hands were flat on the table. He pressed them down deliberately and looked at the menu again. Lamb, duck, a risotto with something seasonal. He read the words without absorbing them. He had dark hair. Vivienne had dark hair. Her mother had dark hair. Her father, he put the menu down, he was 38 years old. He had built a logistics company from a 2-man operation out of a basement in Mississauga into something that now employed 400 people across 6 provinces. He had negotiated contracts full of lawyers specifically designed to make him feel small. He did not rattle easily. He had been told more than once, usually by people who were not happy about it, that he had the unsettling quality of seeming calmer the worse things got. He was not calm right now. He was looking at 2 little girls in a restaurant booth in downtown Vancouver and doing math in his head that he did not want to be doing. He and Vivienne Ashby had met at a funding conference in Toronto, which was the kind of sentence that sounded more romantic in retrospect than it had felt at the time. She had been presenting a regional health initiative. He had been there because his company was being courted for a logistics partnership with the provincial government, and he had arrived an hour early and wandered into the wrong room. And she had been at the front, testing her slide clicker, and she had looked up at him and said, "You're very early or very lost," he had said, genuinely uncertain. She had laughed. It was the specific laugh of someone who hadn't expected to laugh, which was, Callum would later think, the most dangerous kind. They were married 18 months later in a small ceremony in the Okanagan. His mother, Patricia, had expressed her enthusiasm for the event in the way she expressed enthusiasm for most things. Quietly, precisely, and with a series of very specific concerns that she delivered one at a time over the following weeks, as though she were issuing memos. The venue was charming, but perhaps a little rustic. The guest list seemed weighted toward Vivienne's side. Had Callum considered that a prenuptial arrangement might simply be good sense given his assets? Vivienne had never said anything about his mother that was unkind. This, Callum would eventually come to understand, was not the same as saying there was no problem. The marriage lasted 2 years and 7 months. On a Thursday in November, Callum came home to an apartment that was half empty in a way that was so deliberate, so careful, her half, only her half, his things untouched, that it took him almost a full minute standing in the front hallway to understand what he was looking at. There was a letter on the kitchen counter. It said, "I'm sorry, I can't explain it right now in a way that would make sense to you. This isn't what I wanted. Please don't try to contact me for a while. I need time." That was it. That was the whole letter. He had stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then he had called her. It went to voicemail. He had sent a text and another. And on the fourth day, a longer message that he had written and deleted 3 times, and which had not been answered. 6 weeks later, through a lawyer, she had filed for divorce. He had tried twice more to reach her directly. Both times, silence. His lawyer communicated with her lawyer. The process was, she had not contested anything. She had asked for nothing. She had simply wanted to leave, and she had left. And she had taken nothing with her except the things that were hers. And whatever it was, she knew that she wasn't telling him. He had never found out why the waiter came. Callum ordered something. He ate it without knowing what it was. Across the room, the girls had received their food, and one of them, the one who had been doing the lecturing, was now engaged in what appeared to be a detailed investigation of her grilled cheese sandwich, lifting the top piece of bread and examining the cheese distribution with the critical eye of a food inspector. Vivienne was watching her with an expression that Callum recognized even from across a restaurant after 4 years. The expression of someone trying very hard not to smile. He knew that expression. He had cataloged it without meaning to. In the first year after she left, the way you catalog things when you are trying to understand how something that seemed real became nothing. He knew the way she tilted her head when she was listening to something she found genuinely interesting. He knew that she drank her coffee with too much milk and would not admit this was a preference, and maintained it was simply how it came out. He knew that she could not watch nature documentaries about penguins without getting emotionally invested in a way that she found embarrassing. He had not spoken to her in 4 years, 2 months and 11 days. He paid his bill. He stood up. He walked across the restaurant, and he was not entirely sure, even as he was doing it, that this was the right thing to do. But the 2 little girls with red hair were there, and Vivienne was there, and he had spent 4 years not knowing, and he thought that maybe he was done not knowing. She looked up when he was about 6 feet away. He saw, the moment she registered who he was. It moved across her face in sequence: recognition, shock, something that might have been fear, and then something else quieter that he couldn't name. "Callum," she said. Her voice was even. "Of course it was." "Vivienne," he said. There was a pause. The girls had both looked up. 2 identical pairs of green eyes. And there it was, the specific shade, his grandmother's eyes, his sister's eyes, eyes that had no business being in the face of 2 children he had never met, were watching him with the frank curiosity of people who have not yet learned that staring is considered rude. The one on the left said, "Do you know our mummy?" "Yes," he said. "I do." Vivienne set down her fork. "Girls, this is an old friend of Mummy's. His name is Callum." The one on the right said, "That's a funny name." "Rosie," Vivienne said. "It is, though?" Rosie said reasonably. "It's all right," Callum said. He was looking at the girls. He was aware that his voice had done something it almost never did, which was to go slightly unsteady. He steadied it. "How old are you?" Rosie said. 3.5. "And Harper is also 3.5 because we're twins." "We're not the same kind of twins," Harper said, from behind her grilled cheese. "We're the kind that don't look the same," Mummy explained. "Fraternal," Vivienne said, quietly. "Right," Callum said. He looked at Vivienne. "Can I sit down?" She said yes. He didn't know, later, what he had expected from that. Some kind of confrontation, maybe. Or an explanation delivered in the measured tones she used when she had thought something through. What he got instead was 35 minutes of conversation, almost entirely directed by Rosie, who wanted to know whether Callum had a dog. No. Whether he had ever seen a moose in real life, once, on a highway outside Sudbury. And whether he thought the grilled cheese at this restaurant was better than the grilled cheese at the place on Granville Street. He had not tried either, which Rosie found genuinely disappointing. Harper spoke less, but watched him more. She had a quality of very still attention that reminded him, with a pang he didn't entirely expect, of himself, at that age, in photographs. The child slightly off, to the side of the action, observing. Vivienne said very little. she answered when he spoke to her directly. She was managing the girls with the automatic competence of someone who had been doing it alone for a long time, cutting Harper's remaining sandwich into smaller pieces without looking down, refilling Rosie's water glass before she asked. She did not look at him often, but when she did, she held it, and he could not read what was behind it. When the girls were settled with a shared dessert, one crepe, negotiated at length, Vivienne looked at her thinking. You're doing the math? He said nothing. They're yours, she said, quietly, not looking away if that's what you're asking. The restaurant kept going around them. Someone laughed at another table. The kitchen made its kitchen sounds. Callum looked at Harper, who was carefully dividing the crepe with the seriousness of a person who takes fairness very seriously, and at Rosie, who was already eating her half and informing Harper that her technique was inefficient. He said, "Why?" It wasn't a question, exactly. It was just the word. Vivienne folded her napkin. "Not here," she said. "Not tonight, then? When?" "Soon," she said. "I promise you, soon." He did not sleep that night. He lay in his hotel room and stared at the ceiling and went over everything he knew, which was almost nothing, and everything he suspected, which was a great deal, and tried to order it into something that made sense. He had been married to this woman. He had believed in the uncomplicated way you believe things before they are tested, that he knew her. Not perfectly, not completely, but essentially. He had known what made her laugh and what made her go quiet, and the specific way she sounded when she was trying not to cry. He had not known she was pregnant when she left. Or, he turned this over carefully, she had not been. Not yet. Or she had been and hadn't known. The math put the girls at 3.5, which meant they had been born roughly 8 months after she left, which meant he stopped doing the math. He already knew. What he didn't know was why she had gone, and he was beginning to understand, lying in the dark in a hotel room in Vancouver, that those two things might be connected in a way he hadn't wanted to look at directly. She texted him the next morning. A coffee place on West 4th, 11 o'clock. No greeting, no preamble, an address and a time which was, he thought, very Vivienne. He was there at 10:50. She arrived at 11 exactly without the girls, and sat down across from him, and wrapped hands around her mug and looked at him in the way she had always looked at him when she was about to say something she had rehearsed. "I'm going to tell you everything," she said. "And I need you to let me get through it before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said, she told him. It took 40 minutes. He did not interrupt. He had said he wouldn't, and he was a person who kept his word, and also he was not sure he would have been able to find words for most of those 40 minutes, even if he'd tried. The short version, though there was no short version really, because there is no short version of the way a marriage ends, was this. His mother had gone to see Vivienne while Callum was in Calgary for a week in the fall of their second year. She had brought documents. Callum had not known about the documents, a series of text messages printed between what appeared to be Callum's number and a woman Vivienne didn't know, which were detailed and specific and unmistakable in their meaning. His mother had delivered them with what Vivienne described as genuine sadness. She had said she had discovered them by accident. She had said she was sorry. She had said she understood if Vivienne needed time to think. Vivienne had taken 2 days to think, and then she had packed half the apartment and left. She had not told him because she had been, and here her voice, which had been steady through all of it, did something small. She had been ashamed that she had believed it, that she had not come to him and said, "Explain this." She was a woman who worked in public health policy, who believed in evidence and process, and she had looked at those messages and believed them without asking him a single question. She had found out she was pregnant 6 weeks after she left. She had told herself she would call, and then a week had passed, and then another, and the silence had hardened into something she didn't know how to break, and she had told herself that she would figure out how to tell him, and the girls had been born, and they were 3 months old, and then 6 months old, and every week that passed made the conversation seem more impossible. "I know," she said. "I know how this sounds." He looked at his coffee. He had not touched it. "I hired someone," she said, 8 months ago, to look into. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. Some explanation for why my life had become what it was. And they found that the phone number on those messages wasn't yours. It had never been yours. It was a different number, close enough that on a printed page you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. He looked up. She faked them, Vivienne said. Your mother faked them. He drove to his mother's apartment that afternoon. Patricia Reeves lived in a high-rise in Kerrisdale that Callum had helped her purchase 3 years ago because it was close to her doctor, and because the building had a good security system, and because she was 67 and he was her only son, and he had believed, without examination, that this was what good sons did. He had a key. He used it. She was in the living room when he came in, reading, and she looked up with the easy composure of a woman who has spent decades controlling the emotional temperature of every room she enters. Callum, she said, I didn't know you were in Vancouver. I know, he said. He sat down in the chair across from her. He did not raise his voice. This was not a decision he made. It was simply the way he was built, and perhaps the way she had built him. And he found in this moment a certain terrible clarity in it. Tell me about the messages you showed Vivienne, he said. Something moved across her face, a recalibration. He watched her decide what version to offer him. I was trying to protect you, she said. She wasn't right for you. She was never. That's not what I asked. A silence. She would have made you small, his mother said. She had a way of doing that. I saw it. She made me happy, Callum said. That's what you saw. Patricia looked at the window. You had a company to run, obligations. She was always going to pull you in a direction that... She was pregnant, he said, when she left. Did you know that? His mother was quiet. Did you know? He said again, still calm. That when you showed her those messages, she was pregnant with my children. I didn't know, she started. But you suspected, he said. Because you'd noticed. You notice everything. It's the thing you've always been proudest of. He stood up. I have 2 daughters. They're 3.5 years old. I met them for the first time last night. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. I need some time, he said, before I'm able to speak to you again. I'll let you know when that changes. He left without raising his voice. The door closed quietly behind him. In the elevator going down, he stood with his hands at his sides and felt, not anger, exactly, though anger was part of it, but something older and heavier. The specific grief of understanding. Finally, what had been taken from him, and by whom, and why, and knowing that the knowing couldn't give any of it back, it did not resolve quickly. That was the thing he told himself in the weeks that followed, when the urge to make everything neat and settled pressed against the reality of what was actually happening, which was messy, and slow, and sometimes very difficult, and also, occasionally, very funny, because Rosie was a person who found most of life very funny, and did not keep this to herself. He flew back to Toronto, then he flew back to Vancouver. Then he had a conversation with the head of his operations team about what it would take to run the Western Division from a different city. Then he flew back to Vancouver again. Vivienne did not make it easy, and he understood why, and he did not ask her to. He was not a man who confused access with reconciliation. He showed up when he said he would show up. He did what he said he would do. He let the girls decide what they were comfortable with, and he took their lead on the pace of things. And he sat through 2.5 hours of a movie about a bear who could talk, and remembered almost nothing about it. Because Rosie had spent the entire time providing real-time commentary, and Harper had fallen asleep on his arm, and he had not moved for 40 minutes. Because he didn't want to wake her. He got a small apartment on the west side. He learned which park had the good swings, and which coffee shop had the specific muffin that Rosie considered acceptable, and which one she considered a betrayal. He learned that Harper liked to be told stories rather than read them, and that she preferred the kind of story where the ending was earned rather than given. And he would sit on the edge of her bed in the evenings and make things up until she fell asleep. And it was the strangest and most grounding thing he had ever done in his life. He and Vivienne had dinner alone for the first time on a Tuesday in March, at a place that was neither romantic nor deliberately unromantic, just a good restaurant where the food was honest and the lighting didn't try too hard. She told him about the work she'd been doing on a regional maternal health project. He told her about the complications of moving a portion of his operations west. They did not talk about the past, and they did not talk about the future. And somewhere near the end of the meal, she said, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Callum. I mean that in the way that requires more than 2 words, but I don't have all the other words yet," he said. "I know. I have some of them. We can figure it out." She nodded. Outside, it was raining in the particular way it rained in Vancouver in March, which was to say persistently and without apology. "Harper told me," Vivienne said, "that you've been telling her stories about a squirrel who works at a—" "Reginald," Callum said. "He's a reference librarian. He has very strong feelings about the Dewey Decimal System." Vivienne looked at him. "She asked for a story about books," he said. "I improvised." Vivienne put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. It was the laugh, the specific laugh he had first heard in a conference room in Toronto when he had said something stupid, and it was still, after everything, the most dangerous kind. In April, Rosie asked him if he was going to live with them. They were at the park. She was on the swings. Harper was on the climbing structure, conducting some kind of research into whether to the very top. Which you could. Callum was fairly certain, but Harper needed to establish this independently. "I don't know yet," Callum said honestly. "That's something I'm talking about with your mum." Rosie considered this with the swing, arcing gently. "Gordon, from my class, has a dad that only comes on Saturdays," she said. "That seems inefficient." "It does. You come on most days," she observed. "I do, so you might as well live close," Rosie said. "Or just live with us. Then you wouldn't have to drive." "That's a compelling argument," Callum said. "I know," said Rosie. She seemed to consider the matter closed. Harper called down from the top of the climbing structure that she could see the water. "What does it look like?" Callum called up. "Like water," Harper said, "but a lot of it." He and Vivienne did not rush. They were both, in their different ways, people who had learned something about the cost of moving too quickly toward certainty and not quickly enough toward honesty. They were also people with 2 3.5-year-olds who had opinions about everything, and schedules, and particular requirements regarding the acceptable preparation of breakfast foods and the correct procedure for bedtime stories. And it turned out that building a life around 2 small people who needed you to be present was in its way a very effective thing to build toward. He signed a lease on a place 2 blocks from Vivienne's, and then, in the fall, after a great many conversations, and one very long walk along the seawall, and a dinner that ended with Vivienne saying what she meant in the direct, considered way she said things when she'd stopped rehearsing, he moved into the house on the west side, into Spamare, that had been cleared for exactly this possibility, and that Harper had already decided would need a bookshelf. Reginald, the squirrel reference librarian, got his own shelf. It seemed only right. Patricia called in September. Callum let it go to voicemail. Then he called her back, because he was not a person who avoided things indefinitely, and because the relationship was theirs to navigate in time, and that, even if his own was going to require a very long and very honest conversation. He told her that. She was quiet for most of it. At the end she said, "I only ever wanted," and he said, gently, "I know what you wanted, that's part of the problem." They agreed to speak again in a few weeks. It was not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. It was the door left slightly open, which was, he thought, the most he could honestly offer. On a Sunday, in October, he was in the kitchen making breakfast when Rosie came downstairs and announced that she had decided he needed a better nickname. "What's wrong with Callum?" he said. "Nothing," Rosie said. "But it's long. We need something shorter." "Cal," he said. Rosie considered this with the focused expression of someone taking a decision seriously. "Cal," she said. She tried it out. She looked at Harper, who had appeared in the doorway. "What do you think?" Harper shrugged with the great philosophical ease of someone for whom words mattered less than what was behind them. "It's fine," she said. "Can we have eggs?" "We can have eggs," Callum said. From upstairs, Vivienne's alarm went off and then went quiet, and he heard the particular sequence of sounds that meant she was awake and would be down in 12 minutes. He had, without meaning to, learned the exact rhythm of her mornings. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the October light was coming through the window over the sink. And Rosie was still workshopping the nickname question. And Harper had climbed onto the counter to reach the orange juice, which he was 90% sure she wasn't supposed to do, and which he decided to let go this once. He cracked eggs into the pan. He had spent 4 years in a quiet he had told himself was just his life. He knew now that it had been an absence shaped like something specific, like the sound of a 4-year-old demanding a verdict on a nickname, and the weight of a sleeping child on your arm, and the particular laugh of someone who makes you feel, even after everything, that you ended up exactly where you were supposed to be. The eggs hit the pan. Rosie said, "Cal, final answer." "Final answer," he agreed, and that, as it turned out, was enough.